Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2019 romantic comedy titled Yesterday. Now, Yesterday runs for 1 hour and 56 minutes long. It is directed by Danny Boyle. It is produced by Tim Bevan, Eric Fellner, Bernie Bellew, Matthew James Wilkinson, Richard Curtis, and Danny Boyle. The script was written by Richard Curtis. The score was composed by Daniel Pemberton. The cinematography by Christopher Ross. And it was edited by John Harris. And the stars of the movie are Himesh Patel, Lily James, Joel Fry, Ed Sheeran, Kate McKinnon, Sanjeev Bhaskar, Meera Syal, Sophia Di Martino, Sara Lancashire, Alexander Arnold, Justin Edwards, Lamorne Morris, and Robert Carlyle. The intentions of Danny Boyle's Yesterday was trying in all its efforts to pay homage to one of the greatest rock bands in music history. Of course, we're talking about the Beatles. The end result ended up falling prey into another glossy Richard Curtis romantic comedy, making the whole love and appreciation to the Beatles a mere afterthought. I think if they would have done better, if they would have just stick solely on the whole narrative about a guy recreating the sounds and the lyrics to the Beatles. After all, he's in a world where the Beatles just don't exist, and only he remembers the Beatles. He seems to have a great vague memory of the entire Beatles catalog, although he seems to have often struggled with Eleanor Rigby. But still, if they would have just stuck to that narrative instead of just falling victim to a glossy romantic comedy, maybe this movie would have been probably all the more better. Though unlike other music-themed movies like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocketman, the emphasis of Yesterday isn't about the music in its entirety, but creating the what-if fantasy story of what life would be like if the Beatles never existed. The nostalgia adrenaline still comes into full force with the beloved classic tunes that we've all loved from this Liverpool England quartet. However, if you were expecting it to be the centerpiece of this fantasy story, you will sadly be disappointed. Now, some people might probably love the whole romantic comedy elements that goes within the story. I mean, yeah, it's lighthearted. Yes, it's sweet. Yes, it has, pretty safe territory. It's you know, kind of like reminiscent to all those schlotzy romantic comedies that you remember from the 80s and 90s, like from the When Harry Met Sally to the Sleepless in Seattle to Notting Hill and all these other romantic comedies that just sort of melts your hearts and give you that warm feeling inside. In many ways, this movie can be almost reminiscent to those famous romantic comedies from the 80s and 90s. But if you're looking for a movie that has a more musical theme to it, you'll only find like small scattering and fragments within the movie. The main centerpiece is pretty much along the romantic angles between our leading our leading character named Jack Malik, played by Himesh Patel, and um, Lily James's character, whose name is let's see, Ellie Appleton. Well, that's kind of like what the main focus of the story is. So we might get a few hints of Beatles music, but it's only like dealt with in very small fragments, which could probably be a little disappointing if you're a fan of music themed movies. I mean, okay, so it's not a so it's not, necessarily a I mean, the movie is not about the Beatles. It's about a guy who is recreating the Beatles, kind of like rewriting the Beatles catalog, even though it's clearly that the music that he's writing is not written by him, but written by the likes of Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. All the songs that made them famous. Sure, Yesterday has a great influence towards the Beatles' legacy. The musical moments are just gimmicky and are really only utilized as filler in the long run. Though 20 songs show up in the movie, the songs are just placed on for 30 seconds at the most. And the 20 songs that were featured on there are just the best hits that the Beatles had. I mean, the ones that are played more frequently on the radio, and that includes Yesterday. I mean, sure, there are songs like Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road, I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, but you'll probably won't find songs that don't appear on the radio. Songs like Fixing a Hole, or When I Get Home, or Every Little Thing, or Happiness is a Warm Gun, or I Me Mine. You won't be hearing those songs. Just the songs that are like well known by not necessarily like diehard Beatles fans, but fans only who only know the more popular songs. So if you're expecting to hear Taxman, or I'm Only Sleeping, or Getting Better, or Within You Without You, or The Inner Light, you'll probably won't likely hear those songs. Only a small number of songs get full treatment, and that music of the Fab Four is only for influence and not the vocal intentions of what this whole movie is about. There is very little input on what would happen in the music industry if the Beatles never existed. Instead, Richard Curtis decided to take these ideas and just shift it into another one of his formulaic romantic comedies. Okay. Like Curtis's other films in the past, Yesterday has the feelings of a bit of a gender reversed remake of the 1996 film Notting Hill, only this time instead of regular guy Hugh Grant pairing up with superstar Julia Roberts, we have an average lady named Ellie Appleton, played by Lily James, being in a relationship with a mega superstar, Jack Malik, played by Himesh Patel, who's found fame with singing and taking full credits for the songs that Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison wrote and performed. Sorry, Ringo. Don't Pass Me By is not on the catalog. I'm also quite surprised that Octopus's Garden wasn't there. After all, those were the only two songs that Ringo wrote during his 8-year run as a Beatle. Oh yeah, he got better as a solo artist, but as a Beatle, he's only credited to two songs. Okay, yes, he did collaborate with Lennon and McCartney in the song "What Goes On" from the Rubber Soul album, but that's not going to be featured there because that's hardly even played on the radio, if they are at all, if that song is at all. And then, of course, there was that instrumental song called "Flying," which actually all four members collaborated, but that's not going to be featured there too because they're only looking at the songs that everybody knows, the ones that get more airtime, more publicity. In similarities, Notting Hill is a meteoric rise to fame, becomes the focal point for the leading protagonist, but sadly the ending becomes very anticlimactic. For what it's worth, Yesterday does have an impressive alternative universe story that's something that you might see in a Twilight Zone episode, but instead of sci-fi like the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone for romantic comedy aficionados. So the story goes a little something like this. Jack Malik is a struggling musician, and he's not really getting the great gigs. He's putting the efforts into writing great songs, even though it's basically not getting the appeal from the Main Street audience, the Main Street mass. He seems to perform in like small town gigs or kids' parties, and basically he's not really getting anywhere in it. Even though even though Ellie, played by Lily James, is encouraging him to just keep that drive coming, well, he just seems to be at his wit's end and maybe reconsidering taking his career path to a different endeavor. So one day he was riding his bike home when all of a sudden a global blackout occurred. The entire world went on a 12-second blackout. But that 12-second blackout would be a life-changing thing for Jack, for maybe partially for the better, or maybe even into some case for the worse. Well, it could have been worse. Okay, so on his way home, we have the global blackout that only lasted 12 seconds. He gets hit by a bus, and fortunately, he survives. He had, of course, a few broken bones, a few fractures here and there. I mean, it could have been worse. He could have met his demise, which would have not been a pleasant thing. But fortunately, he pulled through. He may have lost a few. He may have broke a few bones and lost a few teeth. But eventually he comes around. He gets his teeth repaired, and feels like maybe he should just give songwriting another try. One day he was entertaining some friends, and then all of a sudden he started singing the song Yesterday. And then everybody was like held back from their seats, almost practically in tears, saying that that's a beautiful song. And then they asked him, "Did you write it?" And he said, "No." "Who wrote that song?" "It was Paul McCartney." And they were like, "Who?" "Paul McCartney, the Beatles." "You mean the Insects?" "No, not the Insects. The Beatles. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr. The Beatles." "No, I never heard of them." One of the greatest bands that came out in the 60s. "Oh, you mean the Rolling Stones?" "Well, they were a great band, but no, the Beatles." So then, he realizes that the Beatles, then he realizes that nobody's ever heard of the Beatles. When he goes to his computer and starts Google searching for Beatles, the only thing he gets are the Insects, which could be played off for some comic relief, but It's just weird. And then the Beatles are not the only thing that's missing from his new alternative universe. Apparently, stuff that seems to be influenced by the Beatles have also disappeared. Like cigarettes, Coca-Cola, Harry Potter, the rock band Oasis, which I guess kind of makes sense since Oasis was influenced by the Beatles. And if Oasis did not have anybody to be influenced by, then I guess it makes perfectly common sense that even they didn't exist. So he's a struggling musician, and only one of the few that see his potential is his best friend, his manager, and soon to be love interest Ellie Appleton, and the romantic build-up that follows through this movie. Jack's world's about to change as the whole world experiences a 12-second blackout. While that happens, Jack gets hit by a bus, and when he awakens, he notices nothing out of the ordinary, except that the alternate universe he lives in has no cigarettes, which is fine. I can live without that. I never smoked a day in my life. Well, I can't say that. I mean, I did smoke once, but then the first time I took it, I never took it again. I got sick, and I said, that's it. You can make fun of me, you can insult me all you want, but all I know is I'm not touching another cigarette ever again. I don't care what anybody says. Coca-Cola? No, not Coca-Cola. Then what is Pepsi going to compete with? Harry Potter? No, not Harry Potter. Oasis, like I said, I guess that makes sense since Oasis was inspired by the Beatles. So if there was no Beatles, there's obviously no Oasis. And sure, it could go without smoking or bubbly, sugary beverages, but the world without the Beatles, well, actually, Pepsi's still around, but the world without the Beatles, well, that's another question. So he takes it upon himself to rewrite the songs the Beatles wrote and to take credit as his own work, making you wonder if he's doing the right thing. Of course, we all know that he's not necessarily organically doing the right thing because he is generally plagiarizing songs that are not his. I mean, I believe that he does seem to be aware that he is rewriting songs that are not his, and that he's only just knows these lyrics by heart, except for Eleanor Rigby, which he struggles from. Anyhow, he knows that what he's doing is morally wrong, but since nobody else seems to know the Beatles, I guess he's just taking it upon himself to make it his mission to rewrite the Beatles. But, if you really want to know something, a lot of the Beatles songs are, although fun to hum to and fun to listen to, for the brilliant harmonies, the great vocals, the instrumentations, and their contributions are definitely always something to treasure. But if you really want to know something, a lot of the songs that the Beatles wrote are very outdated. Especially, songs where, like, for example, back in the USSR. I mean, basically, today it wouldn't sit through because, the USSR was just a failed regime that ceases to exist anymore. All those countries that were part of the Soviet regime are now, independent countries, and they seem to be doing pretty well off for themselves. And then you have, songs like I Saw Her Standing There. Well, she was just 17, having sex with underage girls, and not a very good thing. So and a lot of these songs that seem to be written are, heavily drug influenced. And of course, these days, everybody seems to be somewhat PC and clean. And also, the music industry is definitely a lot different today than it was back in the 60s, where the musicians actually can take the more and more liberties for themselves in how the songs are arranged and how they're performed. These days now, you got to do a lot of gut checks. You got to go through a lot of management. You got to go through a lot of corporate approvals before a song can be released. You just don't have that kind of freedom to write whatever the hell you want, And a lot of musicians these days don't even write their own songs. They actually are. They usually have about 5 or 6 people writing a song that can go on for about 3-4 minutes long. Of course, back, of course, a long time ago, a lot of songs can go on for about 7-8 minutes long. But now these days, people are just so impatient that they just can't sit through a 6-7 minute long song. Songs like Hey Jude would probably only be condensed to maybe about 3 minutes long at the most. Songs like American Pie, which is about 8 minutes long, that wouldn't sit well by today's standards because that song is roughly about 8 minutes long. That song could probably be easily reduced to maybe just a 3.5 minute song. Because people just can't sit through a 6 minute song anymore. I mean, a lot of creativity in the music industry is very sadly deprived than compared to the 60s, where, you could you could write a song and, they don't care about what the meaning is of the song. They don't go through all kinds of editing stuff. If the song is enough to be a moneymaker, we'll just put it on the album. Sure, there'll probably be a lot of takes and things like that, but there's a lot more creative freedom back in the 60s and 70s than compared to today's industry, where you just don't have that kind of freedom anymore. So, Jack is also going through these kinds of protocols that maybe is just something that was what was okay in the past, but is not going to sit very well in the present. Like for example, too. Also, when it came to like selecting the names of albums, like Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a name like that is not going to sit through because they expect some kind of meaning towards Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Like, who's Sergeant Pepper, and what band is he playing for? That's filled with lonely hearts. I mean, maybe they would just condense the name from Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to just Lonely Hearts, or like Abbey Road. Why are we naming a band? Why are we naming an album after us after a studio? And what the hell is a rubber soul? And one of the funnier ones was, I don't like the name of the White Album. It sounds so homogenized, by putting it into safe words. But Jack, he's a pretty smart guy when it comes to memorizing the Beatles songs, as he knows the lyrics and the music by heart. And like I said before, he struggles a bit with Eleanor Rigby. So much so that there was a scene where he was on tour performing these songs, And then he had to kind of take a break from the tour to go to Liverpool, England, to get the inspiration for the song Eleanor Rigby. So that means he had to actually go to the grave of Eleanor Rigby to get the inspiration. But would he have had to do the same thing too for places like Strawberry Fields for Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane for Penny Lane? Or Blue Jay Way, which is actually where George Harrison was staying in Los Angeles. Maybe he should have went there for that too, but then again, Blue Jay Way probably would be featured on this in this movie because let's face it, Blue Jay Way is not like heavily played on the air. Sorry, George. So, it is, a bit difficult to try to emulate or sound the Beatles because sometimes it's not just to try to sound like the Beatles, which unfortunately he doesn't sound like the Beatles, even though he might remember the lyrics by heart. But so what? I can remember the lyrics of a lot of songs by heart, but unfortunately I don't sound like the Beatles. Number one, I don't have a Liverpoolian accent, and number two, I would have to be there at the moment to get a better understanding of what their music is about. I guess I would have to go on a bit of an acid trip to do I Am the Walrus. Cuckoo Cachoo. No, but all kidding aside, I guess you kind of have to be there, be at these places to get a better understanding of their lyrics. Because a lot of their songs reflect to people and places. Eleanor Rigby. Also, there was a person who once recommended to change the lyrics to the song Hey Jude to Hey Dude without realizing that the song Hey Jude was actually about John Lennon, going through a divorce, with Cynthia, and the song was actually for his son Julian, and Paul was trying to, be comforting and reassuring to to John's son that even though, he's going through the emotions and that Julian should not worry, Daddy still loves you. But, he's just going through these moments, And then that's actually what the song Hey Jude is about. But of course, these producers in Jack's world says no, we should change the name of Hey Jude to Hey Dude. Even though we all know that this does not sound right because this is just a comforting song for a small boy because, his mother and father is going through a divorce. The gift of his songwriting does get him noticed. At first by a small-time producer named Gavin, played by Alexander Arnold, and then by a singing sensation named Ed Sheeran as himself, a Grammy-winning musician who kind of sort of resembles a lot. He kind of looks a lot like, Peter Asher from Peter and Gordon, kind of like letting himself go. No, he does. Ed Sheeran. If you look at Ed Sheeran and Peter Asher from Peter and Gordon, the resemblance is quite uncanny. From the ginger hair to the dark horn-rimmed glasses, they look alike. And then finally, a American record executive by the name of Deborah Hammer, played by Kate McKinnon, who provides much more of the sardonic, Americanized humor from, of course, her Saturday Night Live sketches. Of course, with her blend of humor combined with British humor, you can clearly tell the differences. How British humor seems to depend more on words and subtlety, while American humor seems to depend on a little more over-the-top grasp with more expression in their dialect. Jack soon realizes that his relationship with Ellie is definitely beyond business, and he is now caught in a trap where his singing career has pretty much taken over his life, and there's really no room for any sweet romance. Ellie is, of course, quite disappointed because she feels that while the whole world is looking up to Jack, Jack just simply has no time for her. We could tell throughout most of the movie that she's trying to struggle to win Jack's affection, which is happens throughout the movie. And even though it's innocent and it's sweet and all, I still think that for a movie called Yesterday, the music is what should have been the main focal emphasis. And I'm not staking anything against the whole romantic thing. I mean, though both Patel and James have great chemistry, and we do hope that these two have a long and prosperous relationship after the credits roll. Patel, who's famous for playing a long-standing role in the TV series EastEnders, is making his film debut, and he is definitely quite good in front of the big screen. Maybe a little bit maybe a little inexperienced into him, but if he keeps pursuing his career on the big screen, he'll probably get better. As for Lily James, she is just natural in front of the camera, so I'm not taking anything against the performances from these two. But I don't know. Maybe it's just not my kind of genre, the romantic comedy. I don't know. Or maybe it's because I wanted more music and less romance. But then again, when you have a Richard Curtis script, you're just bound to get a little drained out by the whole romantic schlock. As for Ed Sheeran, well, let's just say his acting could use some improvement. Although it's understandable, he's organically not an actor. But he does share some memorable scenes. I'll give him credit, though. He did step up from his jarring performance from the Game of Thrones cameo, but he's more of a Grammy contender than he is as an Oscar contender. So I'm not gonna be that rude and say, hey, Sharon, don't quit your day job. So the light moments are definitely the strong qualities of Yesterday, like when Jack Oogles rigorously for missing things in his new parallel universe. It's definitely pure comical highlights. The moral dilemma of whether Jack is doing the right thing by rewriting Beatles songs and then crediting them as his own is very poorly executed and not well thought of, and was overlapped by the love story angle. So that was a bit of a disappointment there. And sure, the scenarios are provocative and might give some level of intrigue, but it's all secondary due to Richard Curtis, who felt that the movie should pass as a love story as opposed to loving and appreciating the legacy that the Beatles vicariously carried out onto others after their 1970 breakup, including Oasis. The ending wrapped things up fine, but still lacked the energy. So eventually, Jack decides that, he just can't stand living the lie and taking credit for credit that's not his. So he gives up touring and he goes back home to England where he continues to pursue his dream, and not to take away his dream and to just carry out his career as a music teacher. Like I said, it was very anticlimactic, the ending. Boyle, he directed better films before, but it's refreshing that a light film came out in the summer, which is a break from the loud fare of superhero action and monster movies that take over the screen in the summertime. In the summertime, it's basically all just about explosions, monsters, superheroes, and all of that bullshit. So, in spite of its weak points, Yesterday still succeeds in creating a feel good atmosphere, even if there's no Beatles or other additional stuff in this alternative universe created by Danny Boyle and Richard Curtis. It's great to see those who gravitate to the songs that were made famous even though the Beatles didn't sing it here. Now, a lot of people are often questioning, now, the Beatles did not exist, but did it actually mean that the other Beatles didn't? I mean, does it mean that even though the Beatles didn't exist, does it mean that the members didn't exist? Well, to answer you that, the members of the Beatles, or the guys who would be the Beatles, maybe they did exist, but they just never formed the Beatles, because there is a scene where Jack goes to a deserted island where he actually meets John Lennon. In his alternate universe, John Lennon is still alive. He's 78 years, he's an old man. He's living a reclusive lifestyle on a deserted island, and I guess he pursued his other dream, art. I mean, he did actually went to art school. So I guess maybe John Lennon never pursued a music career, but instead pursued his second dream, art. And he was actually played effectively by Robert Carlyle. Even though I kind of wish that he would have sounded more Liverpoolian, you know, to kind of have a little more of a John Lennon accent, something like that. That would have been pretty more. That would have been something I would have enjoyed. And it also leads me up to the other question: what about Paul McCartney or George Harrison or Ringo Starr? I wish we would have seen Jack actually meet them. Or maybe the Beatles didn't exist, but maybe Paul McCartney, maybe Wings existed. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. Maybe, it raises a lot of questions. But I did kind of like that scene. So, overall, this movie was sweet. It was innocent. It was harmless. But like I said, it was just way too sugary. And I wish they did not make this movie into a romantic film. I wish they would have just decided to make it more music themed. Since this movie was about a guy rewriting Beatles songs and taking credit for it, even though they weren't his material. And only he knows it and everybody else doesn't. I just felt that a lot of that was missing. I'm not going to say anything bad against the performances, especially from the two leads. They had some good chemistry. But, it does kind of bring back a lot of nostalgia for people who love the romantic films back in the 80s and 90s, from the romantic comedy legends like Julia Roberts and Sandra Bullock and Meg Ryan. But I still feel that I wanted more Beatles music. I wanted more about him branching out on a mission to rewrite the Beatles and have more focus on that. But I just felt a lot of it was missing because of its lackadaisical approach in emphasizing on that. Instead, we end up getting a sloshy romantic comedy. So for that, if I was to give it a scale out of 10, I would probably give it a 6.5 out of 10. I'm not going to say I don't recommend it. I do recommend it for its lightheartedness and its innocence. And it does tell a good story, but I just felt that if you're a music lover, you might be a bit disappointed. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.